Okay, welcome and thanks for joining us for our Global Data Vault August webinar. I'm Trisha Perot, Marketing Director for Global Data Vault, and I'm kicking off a new series today that takes us back to the basics. In keeping with that theme today, we're going to break it down into the differences between backup as a service and disaster recovery as a service. So BaaS and DRaaS in Veeam. So a little teaser about next month's webinar, though, we're going to build on today's topic even more and discuss Veeam terminology and what each means to you. And as for our speakers today, who might look familiar to you, we have Kelly Caldwell in Product Marketing and Stephen New, who's a Senior Support Manager, both with GDV. And so with that, I am going to hand it over to Kelly to get us going.
Thanks, Trista. And like Trista said, we're talking about BaaS and DRaaS today, backup as a service, DR as a service. And a lot of times those get confused. We'll go through a little bit of what as a service is, and then talk more in depth with definitions for each BaaS and DRaaS. So with BaaS, typically that means that somebody else is managing your backups, right? In our instance, we look at offsite backups and cloud repositories to say that as a service, we are providing you offsite backup, the ability to store that, recover from that, etc. We manage that service for you. It's an OpEx, an operational expenditure, and you don't require any, additional storage or anything on premises for this. With disaster recovery as a service, that gets into a little deeper method of being able to recover any workload in a different location. If you have a disaster at your primary facility or in some data center, you want to be able to recover your workloads and applications in some other place. And that's what disaster recovery as a service gets you. Very similar for us. We manage all of the infrastructure and everything necessary to bring that up. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a few slides. So BaaS, if you guys have followed along, looked at our blog, we always talk about the 3-2-1 rule. And that's 3 copies of your data, 2 different types of media, and 1 offsite. And getting that data offsite to a BaaS provider fulfills that. Typically, BaaS is used to protect against site failures. It's used to allow people to recover data from anywhere, from remote locations, access it from anywhere you basically have internet connectivity. It reduces the risk if you only have one location. So if you just simply need to get your backup somewhere else to meet those 3-2-1 rule requirements, you can do that very easily, thereby meeting your auditory and compliancy requirements that you might have. Now, it's not, we're going to go into the completeness of the solution in the next couple of slides, but this is where you might start, right? And for the people at home, they do a lot of backup as a service when you think about iTunes or some of those other services that you might use to protect a small amount of data at home. So BaaS WORKS, Stephen, let's talk about this a little bit, right? I mentioned a little bit how it utilizes a service, but can you walk us through this slide a little bit, how it works in more depth?
Yeah, BaaS basically works to keep your data at another location. Let's say that your physical location gets hit by a tornado, hurricane, a fire, you have a power outage, something of that nature. What BaaS does is it allows you to get your data off-site. That way, once you have an issue or you resolve the issue at your location, you can restore entire VMs back down to your location. Also, normally what we see is customers that do use our BaaS service, they do a lot of file level restores. So let's say that you lose a Word document, Joni in accounting loses pictures, you can restore that data down from the cloud back into your infrastructure. So the BaaS solution is a hypervisor level backup. And what that means is it takes a hypervisor level image of your server locally. As Kelly mentioned, we do utilize the 3-2-1 rule. It does take a hyper level backup image of the server locally. And then what we normally do is, or what our customers normally do, is configure that job to run off that backup and send it up to the cloud. So also, it does have the ability to protect physical servers. As I mentioned, we always follow 3-2-1 here at GDV or Global Data Vault. And what that means is we keep your data locally. So for any of your physical servers, we're going to store a copy locally. And that is a VSS backup, which is agent-based. It does inject an agent into the server to do a disk level backup for your physical servers. and then stores that locally. And then just like with your hypervisor level backups, we do a backup copy to the cloud, and then that would be sent offsite for the backup as a service solution as well.
Great. Let's talk a little bit about the resources that we'll need for this, right? We always want to think ahead. We always want to prepare and plan ahead of time. So, we talk about business impact analysis to make sure that you are protecting your critical resources, determine what is crucial for you guys, what has the highest impact, what you need to recover first, et cetera. And we'll see this again with DRaaS, but it's still important with backup as a service. So you should always have a business continuity and disaster recovery plan to understand exactly what you need to recover, how, and when. Obviously, you need people and resources to manage all of these situations. But Stephen, what about, backup server and storage and the connectivity required for some of these?
So you are going to need a backup server that is going to be is going to be the brain of the operation that will process the backups. You will need storage to save those backups. And then you're going to need connectivity to get the data offsite to GDV's cloud.
Now, Stephen, we've heard some questions, and I just want to interject this here. And you mentioned it a second ago about taking that local backup first, which is part of the 3-2-1 rule, right? But we get questions a lot about, why can't I just back up straight to the cloud? Do you want to address that quickly?
So the reason why you don't want to back up directly to the cloud, the first obvious reason is you do want to follow the best practices. But the main reason is connections to the cloud are not always stable. It goes over the internet. So whenever you send a large backup or a large file to the cloud, if you experience a connection drop, it could cause an incomplete restore point, and that data could be non-recoverable because you are sending that directly to the cloud. And normally what we see is we actually don't send data directly to the cloud for that reason. If that connection drops and the restore point is incomplete, then it's not going to be recoverable. So that's one of the reasons why we do not send it directly to the cloud. The main reason is because we always follow Veeam's best practices, which is following the 3-2-1 rule and keeping that data locally. And then once we keep that data locally, we'll create the backup copy job to make a copy of the local backup, and then we'll send that off to the cloud.
That's great, because if you only got your production copy and the cloud copy, that's only 2 copies instead of 3, right?
That's correct.
So next, we have how BaaS happens at Global Data Vault. Now, I talked briefly about it not being the more complete solution, right? We talk about recovery point objectives and recovery time objectives. With Global Data Vault, it's more of a best effort thing. So can you walk us through this explanation a little bit?
Yeah, with backup as a service, there really is no RTO or RPO. And what that means is you don't have a certain restore point objective or restore time objective to bring it down. As I mentioned, normally the customers who do choose the BaaS solution or backup as a service solution, they just want to restore a single VM or restore files, and they really don't have a time limit on it. These are normally, I don't want to say not business critical servers, because sometimes they are, but they normally have a few hours to get the data down, or they restore non-business critical files. And that's why this solution doesn't have an RPO, RTO tied to it.
Cool. So as far as the configuration, all that goes, on our side, we set up everything the same, right?
Correct. There is no difference between the configuration on the backup as a service solution and DR as a service solution. Whenever you work with an implementation engineer, it is configured the same way on the Global Data Vault side.
That's pretty good to know, because should people want to move to DRaaS, there's not a whole lot of change that anybody has to do, since it's pretty much configured already, at least on our side. We talked about how backups are taken locally and copied to GDV, so we can, we don't need to rehash that anymore. But I do want to bring up to light again, with backup as a service, all recovery methods, and this is through Veeam, right? All recovery methods are available except instant recovery of virtual machines. And obviously, because of the connectivity and the resources, when we copy the data up to Global Data Vault into a cloud repository, it's not attached to a virtual environment that can power on and spin those virtual machines up and do the instant recovery, right? So is that accurate?
There is a few items that come into play whenever you do the instant recovery of a virtual machine. You do obviously need the virtual infrastructure to bring that server up into, but you also need a local server that will act as a vPower NFS server What that is that it's a mount server to mount the data to bring it up into an instant recovery state. One of the reasons why you cannot do an instant recovery is because of the needing to do the instant recovery. So normally what we see is the options that we can do fairly quickly is the restore guest OS files and the restore entire VMs back down to the infrastructure.
So if you want to spin up a virtual machine, then obviously you're going to want to use DRaaS, right? So disaster recovery as a service, we talked about, you get all of those backup as a service features, except you get to turn on your virtual machines. We can do business continuity, disaster recovery, testing, etc. We can turn your cloud environment now where we're storing your virtual machines into a production environment in the event of a disaster. And we can do that pretty quickly. We don't necessarily look at it as a per virtual machine, individually, but that business continuity and that DR plan, we talk about creating application groups and identifying workloads and applications and the systems that support those. So if you have a large application, it may have, front-end web servers and mid-layer application servers and back-end databases that all have to be brought up, in a similar fashion to be able to make one application work. So we have all that ready and able to go, or we can just do one virtual machine at the same time. And then we do generally see lower recovery times and recover points, Stephen. How quickly, what are we talking about?
So our standard SLA or our standard RTO is going to be 4-hour RTO, which we will have 8-hour RPO. And what that means is we will have 4 hours to bring up a restore point that is 8 business hours old. So the DR as a service does come, first of all, with a SLA and an RTO and RPO.
Outside of what backup as a service is, disaster recovery as a service is a little more complicated. There's more nuances and more things to take into consideration. I'll highlight these and then you can take us into a little bit more. But, again, with that plan, with understanding your environment more, we're going to understand your network a bit. We're going to understand the order in which your virtual machines need to come up. We have the people who we need to contact, et cetera. Can you walk us through, that third bullet point there on what it really entails and why it's complicated?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, it is a complicated process. So GDV has actually simplified it on our side. So whenever we do the instant recoveries, what an instant recovery is, it's actually bringing the server up on our side and making it accessible to your users. And the way that we do that is we bring them up in an instant recovery, and then we create a virtual firewall, and then we provide the ability to log in by providing your users with a VPN access to your servers. And what the virtual firewall does is it actually takes Global Data Vault's internal IP address and it masquerades it as your internal IP address. And the reason for that is because we want to make it a seamless process for the end user. So if they're used to going to a certain DNS name or a certain internal IP address, we make that available to the end user during the full DR events as well as the yearly tests that we provide. And we do provide a yearly test during the implementation process. I tell the users that I want them to kick the tires. I want them to use it. I want them to go in and do everything that they would do in production off their production network. Test from home, disconnected from your VPN, go to Starbucks, use the guest Wi-Fi, stuff like that to test it, to make sure you're not communicating with your live environment and to really get a good test in there to make sure everything is functioning properly.
Yeah, that's a good point because you really, outside of some of the tools that Veeam has, like Sure Backup and the data labs, you really can't test backup as a service except for doing restores, except for actually, doing things that way. But with disaster recovery, we can make sure your entire environment can come up and that way you have peace of mind. So that's another difference between the two there. So the resources, obviously a little bit different. We did mention you need a business impact analysis and the BCDR. You're going to still need people and resources to manage. The nice thing about with the as a service portion of this, again, is that you're going to have the experts on our side to help you through this process. So if you're relying on your own internal staff to do this, it can get overwhelming at times, especially if you have people standing right next to you watching you try to fix things and recover an environment and whatnot. And that's where we can help you supplement the people and the resources to manage that. So similar to backup as a service, Stephen, what are the resources needed for disaster recovery as a service?
So you are going to need the computing resources. And what I mean by computing resources is you are going to need the resources available to bring the servers up. Let's say that you have a ESXi host that goes down locally. You would need a Veeam backup server with resources locally to bring those servers up. And what I mean by bringing them up is into an instant recovery state. And then also on the global data vault side, we have resources in place. If you were to call us, then we would bring those up on our side into an instant recovery as well. So you will need computing resources on both sides to bring the servers up into an instant recovery if it's needed.
Cool. So from a customer standpoint, they really don't have to do a whole lot else. We take care of it on our side to make sure they're in the correct environment and give them the computing resources necessary for that.
Correct.
So while it happens at Global Data Vault, obviously during the implementation process, we're going to learn about your recovery procedures. And it's an ongoing conversation. You know, when we did our webinar about how to create a disaster recovery plan, we talked about how it's a living document. And we encourage our customers and our resellers and our MSPs and whatnot, whenever they update a disaster recovery plan, please let us know and update it with us too, so that we can make sure we're still on board on the same page. We have the appropriate measures in place should we need to enable that plan or execute that plan. So for DRaaS, you know, we do utilize Veeam Cloud Connect. That's a big question that we see a lot. Is this Veeam Cloud Connect? How does that work? Stephen, can you walk us through that?
So Veeam Cloud Connect is a protocol that Veeam uses to transfer the data from your location to our location. It's just a TCP protocol that communicates over port 6180, and Veeam Cloud Connect is the name that Veeam uses to get that data to us. So what happens whenever you use Cloud Connect? We hear customers all the time talking about I want to get that Cloud Connect or something in that nature, but it's a transport protocol is what it is.
Yeah, and we simply use it, right? Because Veeam provides it for us. It doesn't require additional hardware and whatnot on the customer side. Now, we do have, you know, you've talked about doing backups and doing builds out of backups with instant recoveries and things like that. We can lower the RPOs a little bit more if we utilize Veeam replication, right? So that replicates virtual machines directly from one hypervisor to another. Does that require any type of, you know, backup first, or how does that work?
So yeah, we can use the replication piece of Veeam to actually get a lower RTO and RPO. So what that does is that actually takes a snapshot on the customer side, and what it does is it communicates directly with the customer's hypervisor via transport. And then what it does is it takes a snapshot and then it sends that snapshot over the Cloud Connect protocol to the Global Data Vault side, where we have a replication hypervisor environment on our side. And then it stores a copy of that virtual machine on the Global Data Vault side in an off state. So if you were needing to utilize that environment, it's just as simply as us powering it on.
We also have something to decrease the impact that things like malware and ransomware have on customers, or even the risk of them being impacted by it. When we do our builds, when we do disaster recovery, we utilize enhanced data protection, right? So how does enhanced data protection not impact a backup chain? Because that can get a little tricky there.
The reason why it doesn't impact the data chain is it's essentially a fast clone or a copy of the primary data chain that is stored outside of the customer repository. And the reason for that is because if you can access the data, and if you do get malware or ransomware, if Veeam can see it, it can be affected. So that is actually stored outside of the repository to where you cannot see it. And then what we do is we do build off that data. That way, if you are in a test situation, it doesn't impact your chain. And since we're using a copy of your test data, that's why it doesn't lock the Veeam files and or cause issues with the backup jobs that run every night.
Okay, so if we were using the cloud repository files, it would lock those, so the backup copy jobs from your on-premises location couldn't copy to the cloud because the file is locked.
It would actually copy, it just wouldn't do any synthetic or merge operations.
Gotcha.
Because it locks your VBM or your metadata file during the build, and it locks the restore point that we're using. So it wouldn't be able to do any of the merge operations, and it would throw an error that the files are in use.
Well, that's good. That's the reason why we have a dedicated team to handle all of this, right? You got somebody there who knows exactly what's going on and is available to help.
We do have a dedicated team here that is available Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. And if you do have any emergencies or need any assistance for a production server that has gone down, we are available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, including holidays, to assist with any emergencies that you have with production server outages.
All right. So how do we do disaster recovery as a service versus others? I'll just let you talk through this, Stephen, since you're more in tune with this from an implementation on down.
So basically what happens is whenever you implement the solution with GDV, you have an implementation engineer that walks you through the process, works with you. They do a initial assessment during the first call to make sure that you are within both Global Data Vault and Veeam's best practices. And we walk you through the entire process from start to finish until you're successfully implemented. And then once you're implemented, we do request that you do a test. Your annual hands-on test. We schedule that 30 days after your implementation is complete. And then we do provide you with hands-on access, like I mentioned earlier, to kick the tires, to make sure that everything is functioning as you would expect it to in your production infrastructure. Whenever GDV does get engaged for a DR event, we don't provide you with a manual and say, here you go, best of luck. What we do is we get on a bridge with you and your team, and we walk you through the process. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to disable your tenant, and we're going to start spinning up or performing instant recoveries of your server in the background. And then once we get the servers online, we are going to create the virtual firewall that masquerades your IP, that makes it your internal IP address. And then once we do that, we will provide you with OpenVPN access, and then your users will be able to connect. After we verify that you're connecting and you are able to access your servers, then we'll do some maintenance tasks in the background that will actually bring them, I don't want to say a live state, but we'll migrate them from a instant recovery state into production. And then as always, even if it's in your infrastructure or Global Data Vault's infrastructure, we always follow the 3-2-1 rule. So we're going to immediately start backups on your failed environment here at Global Data Vault. And then immediately, as soon as those backups are done, we're going to get the second copy going as a local copy. And like I said, during this process, Global Data Vault will be on the phone with you, and we will be walking you through this.
Yeah, that's pretty good to know that your data is still safe. Even if you're having a disaster, you might wonder, hey, am I being backed up or protected while my data is up there? What's going to happen to all of that? And we do start running those backups for customers. That's great peace of mind. Okay, so we've talked a bit about the differences between the two. If anybody caught Jason Buffington's series, Jason Buffington at Veeam did a series called Why BaaS When You Can DRaaS. Big thing about what customers of different sizes are looking for, what's important to them from both. With Global Data Vault, we think backup as a service is very basic. It's a best effort thing. It's not a complete solution, but it's better than not having an offsite copy of your data. We still apply security to that. So, we are going to help you with being able to recover from malware, et cetera. Disaster recovery as a service, obviously you're going to get the ability to spin up virtual machines to do complete disaster recovery failovers. You're going to have RPOs and RTOs assigned to those. The engineers and everybody that Global Data Vault will have service level agreements to get you back up and running within a certain time, et cetera. And there's really little difference in cost. Stephen talked about the implementations being so similar. The cost difference between doing backup as a service and DR as a service with us is very small because there's very little to change on our end. The biggest thing is just sort of an increase due to the resources that you're going to need during a DR testing and some of the effort that goes in with that. So at Global Data Vault, we are a fully managed service. We do everything cloud-based, disaster recovery, backup as a service, Office 365 backup. We support any virtual environment that Veeam supports. Today it's VMware Hyper-V and Acropolis, which is Nutanix's hypervisor called AHV. And then we support physical servers and endpoints as well via Veeam agents. There's a whole slew of operating systems and things that go along in that. And if you have any questions about that, it's all in the Veeam documentation. But that's what we do. Trista, do we have any questions?
We have a question that comes up from sales quite a bit. So Brian put that in the chat. Can Global Data Vault help architect my infrastructure to assure success if I'm already a Veeam customer, but before I'm becoming a GDB cloud template?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and answer that. During our implementation review, you are assigned a implementation engineer. And the first call that the implementation engineers have with you, even if you are a Veeam customer or if you currently are not a Veeam customer, we always do an architectural review during that first call to make sure that you're both within Veeam's best practices and Global Data Vault's best practices. And then what we do during that first call is we make any suggestions that we can help you with your backups to make them run more efficient for you. So to answer the question, yes, we do an architectural review during our first call, whether you are a Veeam customer or if this is your first time using Veeam. We do a call with both.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Brian, for throwing that out there. So, okay, so I think that wraps up for today. We appreciate everybody's time. If you have questions after the webinar, feel free to reach out to us and we'll get it to one of the presenters or somebody in sales. And I would encourage you to check out some of our previous webinars that you can find at globaldatavault.com/webinars. And of course, I want to make a plug for next month's webinar, which will be all focused on Veeam vocabularies. So hope you can join us for that and have a great time. Thanks.
Thank you.